The Biden administration is planning to push a multi-trillion-dollar jobs and infrastructure plan, and it's supposed to really serve as the centerpiece of Biden's presidency. It's really what he's putting a lot of his focus on. Now, I want to warn you all that most of what we're going to talk about here is preliminary. The negotiations have kind of just started, and everything that sounds good in this legislation might not end up being in the legislation at all. But it's important to know where Biden's advisors stand in the moment on these proposals, and where their heads at. And honestly, a lot of this does sound very good. We'll see what the end product is, but the effort is expected to be broken down into two different parts, okay? So one is focused on the infrastructure, the other is focused on domestic priorities such as growing the newly expanded child tax credit, which I think is a fantastic idea, for several years. Now, that was part of Biden's relief package, but it expires in 1 year. I think that it's one of the better provisions in the relief package that should be expanded. In fact, I think it should be something that doesn't expire, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, in regard to the infrastructure component, it's expected to include $400 billion in spending to combat climate change, including $60 billion for infrastructure related to green transit and $46 billion for climate-related research and development. Before I get into more details about the green components of this upcoming proposal, let me just note that the Sunrise Movement has already come forward and said that based on how things are looking at this moment, it's just not enough to combat climate change. And I would agree with them on that. The plan would also aim to make electric vehicle charging stations available across the country. I think that's also very important. The measure would include $200 billion for housing infrastructure, including $100 billion to expand the supply of housing for low-income Americans. Woz, before I get to the second part of this that really focuses on, the domestic priorities, what do you make of what we're hearing so far regarding this upcoming proposal?
Look, we had Matt Karp on Woke Bros a few weeks ago, and he illustrated something that I just wasn't thinking about. And he's just like, look, the wind is blowing in this direction right now. We talk about all the time when Barry and them passed $700 million in stimulus or relief. 700 billion. It was seen as this crazy expenditure. It was insane. The deficit was gonna come rape our kids at night because it was so scary and horrific. And how can we do it? Then we gotta be careful. And inflation and nothing. And now there's just an understanding, even from the economic establishment, that this whole, deficit and inflation, fear mongering has absolutely no basis in fact whatsoever, right? So we've seen Trump basically do about 4 trillion in spending for COVID relief. Biden passed his 2 trillion in one shot, and now he's selling it to, these sort of mainstream centrist, corporatist type of media outlets. And he's starting out like, yo, we're gonna be at 3 trillion for this infrastructure bill. One, I think it's very telling in the sense that Biden and even the worst amongst the Dems have to understand that President Donald Trump ran on infrastructure. Now, he didn't do anything, right? He did absolutely nothing on it. He didn't lift a single finger, but he ran on it, which means that it's popular, which means that we should be spending as much money as we can on it, getting a bunch of people in very well-paying, unionized, steady jobs, and fixing up the country. Imagine that, like we're like getting multiple stuff done in one spending bill, and not just because we need this to happen. I think Dems need to understand that this is how you stay in power. You give out a bunch of well-paying jobs while making people's surroundings and lives materially better, and you stay in power.
Yeah, and to your point, I think that it's undeniable that culture has really changed in America. Like I feel, and this is just my speculation based on like what I've seen in mass media, and I'm not just talking about the news, I'm not just talking about politics, I'm talking about like shows that come out, like new programming that comes out on like HBO and Netflix. Like there's a certain layer of class consciousness that didn't exist before. You get what I'm saying? Like we've moved so far past, and this is a good thing, so far past the culture of, I think, wasn't that show called Pimp My Ride and like Cribs and like that culture of like, oh, look at, this is the land of opportunity and like let's fawn over wealthy people and you're gonna be there too one day, so you shouldn't want tax increases for the rich. Like we've moved away from that, and I think that's actually great. I mean, the fact that Kylie Jenner got so much backlash for, touting her wealth and then simultaneously asking her fans to donate for the emergency surgery that her makeup artist had, that backlash was a good sign. Because I don't see that backlash happening in 2008, right? But it's happening now because people are much more aware of the inequality in America and how much it impacts their day-to-day lives. It's a good sign. And I do think that we're seeing more and more pressure on politicians to really move away from the neoliberal policies that have, destroyed so many people's lives and shipped so many jobs abroad. Now let's talk about the second component, because that's also incredibly important. The second component of the effort would include many of Biden's other domestic priorities, including, this is great, universal pre-kindergarten and free community college tuition. Now, when I say this is great, I'm talking about the universal pre-kindergarten. That I think is really great. But free community college tuition, like what are you doing, bro? Like, no, public colleges should be free, period. Public colleges should be free like they used to be. The package would also dramatically expand spending on childcare and extend for several years the expansion of the child tax credit, which I mentioned earlier in the story. So I know I shared my thoughts on it already, Woz. What do you think about this part of the upcoming legislation?
Yeah, it's a good sign. These sort of, I guess, what we call social welfare programs, or at least that's what we used to call them. Something like that, universal pre-K, something like free community college. Like this is stuff that is so freaking obvious. And in so many places within the developed world or the first world, or basically countries that actually have money, this is like a no-brainer, right? Where they're already doing all of these things. So of course, we would like to see those happen. And you were prescient in what you said, Anna. There needs to be more. Tuition needs to be free at every single public school, because again, it's not as if this is 1951 where you could graduate high school, get a job at the factory, buy a house by age 22 and keep it pushing. No, this is not the reality. If you want an even decent paying job, you need to have a college level education in this country. So of course that should be free. If the barrier to entry to middle class status or whatever is a college degree, then it stands to reason that we should make that free for all Americans who want it and can do it. That's just obvious. That's what we used to do in this country, right? Like we guaranteed people who wanted to go out and work could get a job that could pay your bills on time. You could take your family on a vacation or two every single year. You don't have to work like a damn slave for it either. And that's what we guaranteed the people back in this country. And allegedly, that's back when America was great. So yeah, let's make America great again, Anna.
No, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right about that. But let's also emphasize, as we have been doing on this show a lot lately, that those weren't just gifts that were handed over to people out of the kindness of politicians' hearts, right? There was a lot of pressure from organized labor that led to the New Deal era, and we don't have that right now. Luckily, there's some positive movement with the Biden administration that, to be frank with you guys, I didn't expect. I mean, my expectations for the Biden administration were so low that I guess I set myself up for being pleasantly surprised. But I wasn't expecting anything like this coming from Biden. They'll campaign on what they're allegedly gonna do. And the relief bill included really great provisions. I mean, it didn't include some of the things that we wanted and demanded, like a $15 an hour minimum wage. But the child tax credit is huge. It's a lot of money that's gonna help families, and I think it's important. What we're seeing from this proposal is pretty good, and I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. The best part, in my opinion, is that White House officials plan to include a measure to force pharmaceutical companies to lower their prices or pay a steep penalty. Now, let's get to why that's important. First of all, we're paying far too much for the same pharmaceutical drugs that other countries pay far less for, right? But this would save the federal government $450 billion over the next decade, according to analysis from the Congressional Budget Office, because the federal government, which pays for Medicare, which administers the Medicare system, would be able to negotiate and pay lower prices for these pharmaceutical drugs. So it would actually save money for the federal government. It would save money for Americans overall. But we should also talk about the possibility of this passing, right? Because we're still gonna run into the same problem that we did with Biden's relief plan. And that's the filibuster in the Senate, the filibuster that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are intent on protecting. Manchin said that he might be open to reforming it, we'll see. But this is the kind of legislation that could pass through reconciliation. And it should pass through reconciliation. If they're not going to do what's necessary with the filibuster, then they should. The other obstacle, though, is unfortunately we have gross conservative Democrats. Let's stop calling them centrists. They're conservative Democrats. And they've expressed repeated unease about the party line vote over pandemic relief, and they've pushed for a return to bipartisan policymaking. I say that we vote them out of office because I guarantee you that their constituents would love to continue the child tax credit. I guarantee you their constituents would love universal pre-K so they don't have to spend an arm and a leg for childcare just so they can go to work. I guarantee you that conservative voters would love this stuff. Right.
Listen,
so
Anna, we need, and I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just getting really pissed off right now. Every editor at Politico, at the Post, at freaking the Times, please, if you're gonna run and print this crap about the bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisan, can you please ask a follow-up? Can you offer proof that that bipartisanship matters to Republicans? Can you show me within the last 12 years, Republicans just being like, oh, of course, let's do this bipartisan thing. It's gonna be great. We're gonna help American people. Where has it happened? Stop printing this crap. Stop just saying this, both sides, bipartisan. Oh, we gotta, the American people wanna see the Republicans and Democrats work together. Stop printing this crap without proof that anybody wants it, that any American actually cares that how they got something was via bipartisanship, or more importantly, that Republicans actually wanna run the government in a bipartisan manner. This is crap. Stop printing this crap, man. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of criticism toward the way the media frames things on this show this week, but it's well deserved. And there is no example in recent history of Republicans wanting to work with Democrats on anything. There's been a lot of examples, though, of conservative Democrats working with Republicans on passing tax cuts for the rich and things like that. It's about time Democrats actually do what they were elected to do, which is represent the best interests of their constituents. These Conservative Democrats certainly haven't been doing that. And I'm tired of media framing that really protects the behavior that they're engaging in. But we'll always call them out here on TYT. It doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans. People who carry water for corporatist goons will be called out, and conservative Democrats do just that.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.